Welcome back to the shop and another episode of Shit Gets Fixed. This is part 2 of our hit and miss stationary engine deep dive. And before we get on with it, I would once again like to remind you that here at Shit Gets Fixed, we use your likes and subscribes to offset the financial burden for people fighting cancer. Our goal is to monetize this content and give all that money away directly to people fighting cancer. You see, I know from firsthand experience that during cancer treatments like chemotherapy or radiation therapy, those treatments that cancer patients rely on, that they're depending on to save their lives, are making them so sick that they can't work. And this impacts their financial ability to pay for such basic needs as food, not only for themselves, but for their children. In fact, it could be a child that has this cancer, and I find that unbearable to think about. Regardless, this financial trouble makes it difficult for people in this position to pay their rent or their mortgage or to put gas in their car so they can get back and forth from their hospital visits. These are the people we aim to help through the Shit Gets Fixed nonprofit. So, press the subscribe button. It costs you nothing to do that. Press the thumbs up button. That's free too. And post a comment about how kick-ass this all is. And yeah, believe it or not, that's also free. Now, I know your time is extremely valuable, but I think spending some of it this way is worth it. Go to our nonprofit website at www.shitgetsfixed.org and learn more about how and why we do this. Alrighty, let's fix some shit. So let's review what we've learned in part 1. We've learned that I like this old thing. I like it as much as a fat kid likes sugary confections. We've also learned what the hell hit and miss even means and when it happens. We've also learned how those heavy flywheels and atmospheric intake valves in those flyweight or flyball governing systems play a part in that hit and miss business. But most importantly, we've learned that I have a unique take on footwear. Classy, yes, but nevertheless a bit odd. Anyway, so in part 2, we're actually gonna fix some shit on the 1915 Sattler. And first up is taking care of business on the old Webster Tri-Polor oscillator. Let's take this bad boy over to the inspection stand and get up close and personal with it. The Webster Tri-Polor oscillator is a type of magneto, and a magneto generates AC voltage to produce a spark at a spark plug, or in the Webster's case, at what is called an igniter. Magnetos are still in use today. There's one in your gas-powered chainsaw, string trimmer, leaf blower, lawnmower, you name it. They're simple, dependable, and they don't need a battery to work. And that's because magnetos use a process called electromagnetic induction to produce the energy needed to create that spark. On the Webster, this electromagnetic induction happens when the armature gets tripped or triggered. And I have a slow motion video of this happening on the Sattler. So you can see the triggering arm on the Sattler slowly approaching and then pushing the trigger on the Webster. And as this is happening, the spring-loaded armature of the Webster is rotated about 35 degrees or so and then released quickly, kind of like a mousetrap. And because the armature is spring-loaded, it goes into like an oscillation or a bowing effect. You see, the springs are trying to rapidly pull it back into its neutral resting position, but because of its momentum, it slightly overshoots that position and repeats this slowing oscillation until magnetic drag and friction stop it at its neutral resting point. It's the buoying effect. I mean, you get it. So we want our Webster to produce the most energetic spark as possible. This will improve how well the Satley runs, and things like mechanical wear and tear and a weak magnet are some causes for poor performance or a weak spark. So the list of shit we need to fix on the Webster starts with just a good cleaning and lubrication. This thing is filthy. This will give our spring-loaded armature better acceleration during that boing effect. We also need to set what is called its secondary timing. We'll get more into that in just a bit. And believe it or not, we are going to recharge or remagnetize its magnet. Wow, right? Anyway, I figured to justify all this hard work, we should test the Webster now, like it is, pre-shitty-gitty-fixy, and then again after, quantify things a little. And to do all this testing, we need a Webster bench tester. Let's do this. So before we get on with all this testing business, keep in mind that we want the Webster to produce the most energetic spark as possible. That's why we're doing all this baseline testing, kind of see where we're at. And to help us better understand what we are testing for, you should think of the Webster as two separate things connected together. One half of it is the part that creates the stuff we need to produce a spark, and the other half is two switches. One switch tells us when to create this stuff, and the other tells us when to turn that stuff into a spark. And all this stuff is produced when that oscillation or that boing effect happens. And when that stuff is turned into a spark is that secondary timing thing I mentioned. So we want a lot of stuff, and we want this stuff to be turned into a spark at the right time. This is what we are testing for. And because all of this happens at such breakneck speeds, I mean, we're talking milliseconds here, we are going to use this. And this is an oscilloscope. An oscilloscope has the ability to capture electrical signals that happen in the blink of an eye and present it on a screen as a 2D graph. This will help us visually see what the hell the Webster's doing and when it is doing it. And trust me, this is going to be really neat. Come on, man, that's my thing. Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead, you say it. Wow, this is going to be neat. Alrighty, so we've got our oscilloscope set up, and we're testing on two channels. Channel 1 is looking at the amount of stuff we're making, and Channel 2 is going to show us when that stuff is being turned into a spark. But let's just whoa our horsies here a little, and for the first test, we'll just look at Channel 1. Here we go! That was excellent! Let's analyze the results. That's it? You weren't kidding when you said milliseconds. So what you are looking at is a screenshot of the oscilloscope, and the wavy yellow line is the stuff that is being produced during that oscillation or boing effect. This stuff is actually AC voltage, and that's why we see this alternating waveform. And you can see it builds quickly and then slowly dampens over time and then stops. To help us better understand how that oscillation correlates with what we are seeing on the oscilloscope, I've made a cardboard cutout stop-motion animation. And it begins when the first switch tells us to start making that stuff. And we start to make this stuff slowly at first, but those springs quickly accelerate the creation of that stuff. And we see a rise in the waveform. Now, because of those springs, it starts to slow down again and stop briefly, and then start the return trip home, and we get a slightly smaller rise in the amount of that stuff on the other side of the waveform, and so on and so forth until we come to a rest.
People, this is the Boing effect. We are doing science.
Now, let's watch this a few more times and take in all this science. And as we do that, I think it's now obvious that the faster we are oscillating, the more stuff is being produced. And this is why a good cleaning and lubrication should help us out in the long run. Now, let's run the test again, and we will add channel 2.
Testing in 3, 2, 1. Excellent once again. Let's analyze the data. Wow. Wow, you weren't kidding me. Milliseconds.
So the yellow line shows us a familiar and now understood waveform of stuff. The newly added green line shows us when that stuff is being turned into a spark. What we are looking for is an abrupt vertical rise in the green line. That's right here. And where those two lines intersect is the exact point in time the spark is happening. Now remember, we want the most energetic spark as possible, and we can see visually that peak stuff is happening up here, and our spark is happening down here. It's happening too soon. We have a lot of unused stuff that would make our spark more lively.
So the results of our pre-shitty-gitty fixie test are as follows. The amount or peak stuff that we're making is 2.8 volts. And that spark, well, it's happening too soon. Let's fix some shit on the Webster and see if we can improve things a little. And like I've said, the things we are going to focus on are a good cleaning and lubrication and recharging its magnet. These efforts should improve the amount of stuff we make, and of course we will adjust when we turn this stuff into a spark. That's secondary timing thing, so the spark will happen when we are producing peak stuff. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to get to work on cleaning and lubricating the Webster, and as I'm doing that, I'm going to have you guys get after making the magnet recharger. Alrighty, giddy up!
So before all this, I didn't know diddly squat about magnet rechargers, and I still don't. But what I do know, this is the majority of the stuff we're going to make ours out of. This is basically how it's going to play out. All of this special copper wire is going to be wrapped around these cylindrical pieces of steel, turning them into our windings. These rectilinear pieces of steel will end up being the frame of our recharger and what is called pole pieces. You'll see how those work a little later. And weighing in at almost 35 pounds, we have our new magnet recharger. How this is all going to work is we are going to place the Webster magnet on the pole pieces like this. The pole pieces act as a bridge so we can recharge different size magnets. Anyway, we are going to power up the recharger with a large 12-volt car battery for a few seconds. And then, voila, we should have a more powerful Webster magnet. But before we can do any of that, we need to establish the north and south poles of our magnet, because we need to place the north pole of the magnet on the south pole side of the recharger for things to work properly. And a simple way to determine our poles of our magnet is to hang it by a string over the top of the recharger and power things up for a second. And because opposites attract, the magnet will spin so that its north pole aligns with the south pole of the recharger and vice versa. Or you could use one of these. This is a Tesla meter, a Gauss meter. Anyway, you use one of these guys to measure the strength of a magnetic field and to determine its poles. It uses a Hall effect sensor, whatever the hell that is, to detect magnetic flux density and tells you how many of these flux densities you have and whether they are of the north or south pole kind. So now that we know the location of our north and south poles of our Webster magnet, and that it currently has a magnetic strength or a magnetic flux density of 40.1 MTs or milliteslas, that's a unit of measurement for this kind of stuff, let's kick the tires on our new magnet recharger and see what happens. And just like that, it's done. I'm not kidding. It actually is done already. Well, I suppose that was neat, maybe? Well, let's get our newly cleaned and lubricated Webster assembled with the hopefully more powerful magnet and retest it with our oscilloscope so we can do the big reveal of our pre and post shitty gitty fixie test results. And the results are in. Let's see if our efforts have paid off. Our magnet's magnetism went from 40.1 MTs or milliteslas to 68.9 MTs, and that equals more. The amount of stuff the Webster is making went from 2.8 volts to 3.4 volts, and that is also more. We also adjusted that secondary timing thing so our spark is happening at peak stuff. And that means we're using more of that stuff to create that spark. And yet again with this more thing. And more is always better, with some notable exceptions like sexually transmitted diseases and, oh yeah, foot funguses, obviously. I don't know. So now we need to set the primary ignition timing. That's when the first switch on the Webster is triggered. The switch that tells us when to start making that stuff we need to produce a spark. And because I want the Satley to do some work in the future, like run the 1909 power hacksaw, we want to set our primary ignition timing somewhere around 27 degrees before top dead center or TDC on the compression stroke. This top dead center thing is the exact highest point that the Satley's piston reaches during its upward stroke. And this degrees before thing is the degrees of crankshaft rotation before that exact highest point is reached. To visualize this, think of it as a big old analog clock. Top dead center, or TDC, is high noon, and our timing spec of 27 degrees before top dead center is like, 11:54, 6 minutes to noon. I mean, kind of makes sense, right? You get it. So, many years ago, I established the Satley's TDC, or top dead center, and marked it with these punch marks and painted them yellow. When they line up, the piston is at TDC. Some hit and miss engines have casting marks that indicate this, but the Satley didn't. To get us to that 27 degrees before top dead center, we need to turn the flywheels. And to know how many degrees we turn those flywheels, we could use this. This is a degree wheel, but I prefer to use this. And this is an angle finder. The big problem with my preference for the angle finder, even though it has a magnetic base, is mounting it to the flywheel so it doesn't move around. And since I don't like doing math, it's even harder to get it set to 0 when we're all lined up at TDC. So that got me thinking about a base for my angle finder, a magnetic base that I could zero out. And I will be right back. Now that we have a magnetic base for my angle finder and we can easily zero it out when we're at TDC, we can get on with this primary ignition timing thing. And to make an adjustment to our timing, we move this ramp on the Satley's trigger arm. To see if we move that ramp just the right amount, what we are going to do is rotate the flywheels in the opposite direction that they turn when the Satley's running. Turn them like 65 degrees or so, something like that. Then we're going to rotate the flywheels in the correct direction of rotation, very slowly, until we hear the Webster being tripped or triggered. Okay, slowly now, waiting for the Webster, slowly now, slowly, there. So when we hear that, we want our angle finder to read 27 degrees. It reads 27 degrees, right? It's dead nuts, isn't it? Yes! So the really weird and interesting thing is we actually didn't set the primary ignition timing to 27 degrees before top dead center or TDC. Hear me out. Remember way back when we talked about the two switches on the Webster? That first switch that tells us when to start making that stuff, and the second switch that tells us when to turn that stuff into a spark? Well, if we look at the screenshot of the oscilloscope again, we can visually see the time delay between those two switches. And that time that elapses, or the delay, is about 7 milliseconds. And in that time, the flywheels rotate an additional 18 degrees when the Satley is running at its desired RPM, give or take. So in reality, we set our primary ignition timing to 9 degrees before top dead center, not 27. We start making that stuff at 27 degrees, but we turn it into a spark at 9 degrees. Pretty cool, right? And it's all starting to come together now, isn't it? So the last little thing here is to install the primer cup, and that's pretty easy. A primer cup is used to help start a cold engine. Because you get these guys going by manually turning the flywheels, getting fuel into the combustion chamber can be difficult because the typical hit-and-miss fuel delivery system is very rudimentary and vacuum-based. So you would fill this cup up with gasoline or kerosene, then open up the valve, and that would introduce fuel directly into the combustion chamber, making starting a cold engine much easier. Well, I suppose we kind of hit all the marks here, so I figure it's time I say what I always say at this point. Job done! I said way at the beginning of all this that I like this old thing, and I do. I like it enough to actually own it. It's mine, you see. But I feel I'm less of its owner and more of its keeper or its caretaker. I'm responsible for it until the next keeper or caretaker comes along. That's just how I feel about these old things. Anyway, for some reason I think of the Satley and some of the other old piles of junk I own or keep or caretake for. I think of them as sacrosanct or sacred in a way. I don't know why. They just mean something to me. In the Satley's case, sure, it turned horses into horsepower, and that should be reason enough alone to hold it sacred. But I think it's more to do with how it did that as a machine. Its ruggedness, its mass, all of its parts exposed, its gears and rollers, its crankshaft, connecting rod, and its piston. All of it on display. And because of that, back in 1915, they could see how this new machine worked, understand it, and most importantly, fix it. It wasn't some magical black box. It made sense back then. And unlike a lot of stuff today, that still makes a lot of sense to me now. Well, I'm gonna leave you with the Satley doing its thing. It's 111 years old, and it's doing its thing. It's doing its thing because shit gets fixed. And you know something? I think that's pretty neat. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.